In game one, the Raptors bench did what it has done all season long, doubling up the Wizards' reserves 42-21. DeLon Wright led the way with 18 on 7 of 10 shooting, while C.J. Miles hit 4 threes for a dozen points. Such a luxury for Dwayne Casey, who played 11 in game one, as he indicated he would, and he's got Van Vliet back tonight. Maybe he plays 12. Who knows? It's basically unheard of this time of year. But Griff's here to talk to us about the luxury of having your regular season lineups like that bench unit available to you in the postseason. Amazingly, the Raptors' first 5 off the bench have the 3rd best aggregate net rating of any 5-man unit in the entire league in the regular season. Only a Timberwolves group and the Sixers' preferred starting 5 have better numbers. And coaches obviously know all these numbers.
They do know these numbers, and what happens in the closest moments of tough games, you tend to go with what you trust and what you know. So for Dwayne Casey to continue to trust the bench, particularly in the absence of Van Vliet, was a really big step for them, because that bench has been such a big advantage. Very often you go away from that, you lean too heavily on your starters in big moments of playoff games. So it's deeply meaningful for these teams to all have the continuity they've had where they can continue to play these lineups. Obviously, Embiid has not been available for Philadelphia, and you've seen the impact of that. We've got him in this graphic here because we believe he'll be available moving forward, and that's the impact he makes on their roster from a net rating standpoint.
From what I've read, he would like to be available right now.
Yeah, no, he certainly believes he's available. If it were up to him, he is playing. But what's interesting is when you see these numbers, Tyus Jones, by way of example, is a bench guard and did not start. They start Teague. And so it'll be really interesting to see as this series goes along, will Tibbs go back to leaning on Tyus a little bit more because he gives him more of a defensive component? When they played really well together during their best stretch this season, Tyus and Butler were menacing together defensively, and they may need to return to that at some point in this series as well.
Now for some frustrating numbers. If you happen to be a fan of the Rockets, the Oklahoma City Thunder, or the Boston Celtics, we have all these exceptional lineups that played together for fewer than 250 minutes but are now unavailable because of the players whose names are highlighted there in yellow.
Yeah, and this is really significant for Houston because of the loss of Ba Mute and Anderson both. Ba Mute is in 2 of their very best lineups, and he gives them a defensive flexibility when he plays with P.J. Tucker that they just don't have otherwise. This will be meaningful if he's not 100% when they get to that next series. I think they're going to get through this series with Minnesota, and I don't think it's going to be something that's terribly debilitating. But as they continue to move forward, people, I think, tend to put a lot of emphasis on the fact that Kyrie's out, by way of example. You notice when a star is missing, you don't put quite as much emphasis on a role player like Robertson and Ba Mute. In the case of Portland, they're missing Mo Harkless. He's been a huge part of their best lineups. If they had actually played 250 together, they would have been #1 on that list. He's in a lineup with Harkless, Aminu, Nurkic, Lillard, and McCollum that's 30.9 in net rating.
Which is huge.
Which is absolutely unbelievable. It means they're outscoring opponents basically 30.9 points per 100 possessions. It's a pretty meaningful number.
You've been in the NBA long enough to have seen the influx of data, big data, into the way teams are put together and the way coaches play their players. I'm curious how it's changed the way a coach deploys lineups in terms of, oh, I'm going to lean on this lineup because it's been really good for me, as opposed to matching up with what's on the floor for the other team.
I think there's some of both, actually, and I think it depends on the coach. I think Brad Stevens is probably somebody who's shown a more greater propensity to go with the numbers and to stick with the numbers and to really, frankly, sell the numbers to his players and explain why he believes in them. And then I think there's guys that use those numbers as a way to only be meaningful if they're shouting no at something that your eyes tell you, or maybe sometimes, in a worst case, they think they're only meaningful when they go along with what they do see. And I think that becomes dangerous. But you don't need any numbers to know. Cleveland's at an enormous disadvantage. They started a lineup in game one that had only been able to play 5 minutes together because of the trades and because of the injury to Love, the injury to Nance, the issues that Hill was dealing with. Hood was dealing with a back injury. They were not able to build any kind of synergy together whatsoever. So to have to start that lineup in the first game of a playoff series against an opponent that beat you 3 out of 4 times, Indy has no fear of that team. And it's very difficult to find your balance in a situation like that. Ty Lue's talked about potentially starting J.R. Smith in place of Hood in the next game. Well, that lineup's played exactly 0 minutes together.
It's amazing.
So it is impossible to find your way sometimes from a coaching perspective, relying on data, because they have none for this.
Right.
So this is very much going to be about gut feel and about who LeBron and Kevin Love can be most comfortable with, because no matter what happens, no matter who they play, they've got to find a third player that can be the trio there to help bring them through this series.
It's very much an old school approach, right? You just go with what you see and what you think.
It has to be. And fortunately for them, they've got the right people there. Ty Lue, Larry Drew are incredibly good at that. LeBron has incredible feel, very much a basketball savant. In fact, to a fault, in the previous game, went out there trying to get everybody else going too much. And I think Ty Lue's made it clear that you're going to see a LeBron that comes out and is assertive from the beginning.
Really interesting. All right, lots more coming up here on Game Time. Drew Holiday helped the Pels to a Game 1 win on both ends. Greg Anthony, though, is getting defensive when we come back.